There is no place that is safe in the world today. Your only safety, your only true happiness, your only real peace is in the hands of God. And you that know Him, this is your time to shine. So I just wanted to say that today before we get into our message, because we're going to be talking today about the holiday, the celebration, the biblical story of Purim. We're going to be in the book of Esther, Sefer Esther. So let's turn in your Bibles to the book of Esther. And we're going to be at chapter 4 today. Now, it's impossible to tell the whole story of the book of Esther without reading all of the chapters in the book of Esther. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to read a few verses, and then I'm just going to talk to you about the story. I'm going to fill in the rest of the story just from talking to you. You can read it in your Bibles, but in the book of Esther and chapter 4, we're going to look at verse 13. In chapter 4, verse 13 of the book of Esther, Mordecai, as you would say it in English, in Hebrew, we're going to say it as Mordecai. Come on, you English speakers. Mordecai. Mordecai. Very good. We're going to talk about Mordecai. And it says in verse 13, and Mordecai told them to answer Esther. And he said, do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than the other Jews. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. And yet, who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Now, think about that. Let's talk about for such a time as this. Let's talk about Queen Esther. It's easy to think of Queen Esther as this great and beautiful, glorious queen who was the queen of King Xerxes from the Medo-Persian Empire. And they ruled all of the world. It was one of the ruling, reigning empires of all civilization that Daniel Hanavi had received the vision of from Gabriel and the vision from God about the worldwide kingdoms. You remember, it was Babylon. Babylon was followed by the Medo-Persian Empire. They were followed by the Grecian Empire, and they were followed by the Roman Empire. And then at the last days, that Roman Empire would revive and come back on the scene in the last days of the world. If you look at a map of the European Union today, you'll find that it covers about the same territory and even more than the old Roman Empire did. We're living in those days. All of those countries now coming back together as this Roman Empire. But the second empire mentioned in the vision of Daniel the prophet, Daniel Hanavi, that second empire was the Medes and the Persians who partnered together to rule all of the civilized world. And they conquered all of the Mediterranean and all of the nations along the top of Africa and all of the nations along the Mediterranean and the Middle East and all the way into what today is Iran. That's where Persia was. Remember, Iran came from the Persian Empire. The Iranian people today are the Persians. the Chaldeans and the Persians. So as they were conquered, there's a story that unfolded, you see. Xerxes was the king of the Persian Empire at that time, of the Medo-Persian Empire. And he had a queen named Vashti. And Vashti was a beautiful queen. And one day Xerxes had called all of these people together, all of these noble people. He had called all of these rich and important people together from all of these countries. And he was bragging about how rich he was. He was bragging about how powerful he was. He was proud. And he was telling everybody about all of these things that he had done, all of these things that he owned, and all of these things. And then one day he said, I know what I will do. I will show them how beautiful my queen is. And so he asked Vashti to come before these people with her veil removed from her face. Now that was against the culture at that time. And it was humiliating to the women at that time, especially the queen. And Vashti thought about it and she said, I'm not going to do this. And so she disobeyed the king. She said, I'm not going to do this. Well, this made the king humiliated in the eyes of all of the people that had gathered to listen to the king and to see all of his great wealth and possessions and power. And so the king met with his advisors and he said, what am I going to do? And they said, well, if you allow this to happen, then every woman throughout the empire is going to be inspired to do the same things and rebel against their husbands. And so the king said, well, okay. And they came up with a plan. They said, okay, you go out in all of the countries that we have conquered. You go out in all of the world that I rule over. And everywhere, and you find the most beautiful virgins out there, and you bring them, and you choose somebody to replace Vashti. You choose somebody beautiful to replace her. And in all of this, all of these women that they brought, none was more beautiful to the king than this lady, Esther. Her name was Hadassah in Hebrew. Hadassah, slicha. But in the Persian language, it was Esther. And the king loved her more than any of the others. And she was put in part of the king's harem. Now, we don't have those anymore today. At least not in the part of the world that I come from. We don't have them here. But the king had all of these women who were part of the king's family. That's saying it nicely. And they would come into the king and spend time to the king whenever he called for them. The Bible called them concubines. And so, but Esther was his favorite. Esther was the most beautiful. He loved Esther. And she had this special relationship with the king. But she was Jewish. Her father and her mother were no longer living. And she had been raised by Mordecai, which was an extended member of her family, her uncle. And he raised her just like her parents would. But Mordecai was like a father to her. He was like a mother to her. And so Esther had been raised in the household of Mordecai. But when she was chosen, Mordecai told her, he said, do not tell anybody that you're Jewish. Because many of the people in the empires at that time did not like the Jewish people. And he said, well, wait a minute. I thought that was just the Christians. Oh, no. This happened long before Yeshua even came. You know, and I know, that the Jewish people have been persecuted for thousands of years. by many peoples all over the world, not just Christians, not just the Muslims, but they've been persecuted by other people also, right? Why? I'll tell you why. It's spiritual. It's spiritual. Why would so few people be persecuted by so many people? If you read the Bible, you begin to understand. Through the Jewish people, there would come the Mashiach, the Messiah, who would save mankind from sin. He would provide the atonement. He would provide the forgiveness of sins to restore mankind to God. Satan knew this, and so he did everything he could to destroy the Jewish people so that this Messiah would not be able to come. Because the prophets had said that the Messiah would come from the seed of the Jewish people. From the seed of Abraham, from the seed of Yitzchak, from the seed of Yaakov, from the tribe of Judah. And Satan knew that if Israel did not exist, the Messiah could not come and take these people from the hands of Satan and give them over to the hand of God. So even back then, even before Yeshua walked this earth in flesh and body, people were trying to persecute and destroy the Jewish people. And so Mordecai advised, he counseled with Esther. He told her, he said, do not tell anybody that you were Jewish. She agreed. So she went into the palace. She began her life as this beautiful queen of the most powerful king in all of the world. And he loved her more than any other. Well, Mordecai, because he was really her father, he was doing the role, he was doing the work of Esther's father, he was also brought to the palace at that time. Well, one time, Mordecai was sitting out by the king's gate. That's the gate that people would go in to see the king. And Mordecai found out about a plot, about an evil plan by two of the king's guards. And they were planning how they were going to kill King Xerxes because they were angry with him. And so Mordecai found out about this, and he sent a message to Esther to tell the king and to warn him. And so this message got to the king. They found out about it. They investigated, and they found out that the story, the report from Mordecai about these two guards and their plan to kill the king, they found out it was all true. And so they had these two guards killed, and the king's life was saved. And this was written in the book of the king, because for the worldwide kings of the Medo-Persian Empire, everything that they did, they wrote in a book to record the acts and the actions and the reign of that king. So this was recorded in the reign of King Xerxes in a book. Well, as we go down through time then, that time passes, and it's now another time in the future. And there's this man named Haman. And Haman is a very powerful noble. The king had many noble princes that attended to him. The king had many people that were very wise and powerful. And somehow Haman had elevated himself above the other noble people. And the king gave him special authority. And he told Haman, he says, you are going to be the second most powerful person in all of the land. The king is still the first most powerful, but Haman, you will be the second most powerful in all of the land. And he said, I'm going to make a decree that whenever you pass by, everybody will bow down to you in respect for your power and authority, in respect for who you are. Well, Haman liked that. Because you see, Haman was a very proud person. He had, as we say in English, an ego. He had a big ego. He thought of himself as very special, far above other people. But as he was walking along one day, he walked by the gates and he noticed that everybody was bowing down to him, but Mordecai did not bow down to him. Because Mordecai was a Yehudi. He was Jewish. And he knew not to bow to any man. You only bow to God. Now, we bow before Yeshua because God became a man and became our Mashiach, our Kippur, our atonement to save us. So we're not bowing before some man. We are bowing before the Lord who became a man. But we believe in the same God of the Tanakh that Kol HaYehudim, Amen. We believe in the same God that all of the Jewish people believe in. We just believe that He also became a man to save us. And that's what the Tanakh, Kol HaNevi'im, all of the prophets, that's what they had talked about, you see. And so Mordecai was not going to bow to this normal man, Haman. And Haman was very angry because Mordecai would not bow before him. And so he was very angry. And then some people said, well, Mordecai is a Yehudi. He's a Jew. And so Haman began to think, well, I'm so mad at Haman. I'm so mad at Mordecai. It's not enough to kill just Mordecai. I am so angry at his rebellion against my authority that I'm going to kill all of his people too. Because he's not bowing to me because he's Jewish. So the other people would not bow to me either. So I'm going to kill them all. That's what Haman said. And he started making a plan. And he got together with his counselors. And they were superstitious people. And they said, well, what day would be a good day to kill all the Jewish people? And Haman could do that because he was the second most powerful person in all of the Medo-Persian Empire. He could do that. He had the authority of the king and the signet ring of the king to make a decree to where all of the Jewish people could die, if that's what he wanted to do. And he said, well, what day is a good day to kill the Jewish people? And they were so superstitious that they did the same thing as we would do today, rolling the dice or drawing straws to see which one is the long one or which one is the short one, or rolling the dice to see what numbers came up. In fact, that is where the word Purim comes from. It was something that they did. They were like dice, that you would take a chance and you would draw them and you would see how it worked out. And you would determine what number it was going to be by the way these Purim were picked. That's where we get the word Purim. Okay? It was from their culture at that time. And it was these things like dice, but only you would pick them to see what would be the best way to go. Now, there were other times in the Bible that men of God did this sort of thing by drawing straws. And God would make His will known through there. But these people didn't worship the true and living God. They worshiped false gods. But they were superstitious, so this is what they did. And they came up with a date that in your English calendar would have been March 7th of the next year. Now, we say that date today, in the month of Adar, in the Hebrew month of the Hebrew calendar of Adar, B'yom Shalosh Esrei, or the 13th of the month of Adar. Today we celebrate Purim on the 14th of the month of Adar. And I'll tell you why in a little bit. Because that's when the Jewish people were delivered and did not have to worry about Haman's threats anymore. But the 13th was going to be the day in which they would kill them all. So Haman and his advisors came up with this plan to kill all of the Jewish people on the 13th day of the Jewish month of Adar. Okay? Well, eventually, Mordecai heard about this plan. Haman had told his wife, he had told all of his friends what he was going to do, and now the word was out. And the Jewish people were worried. And Mordecai said, well, I'll send a letter to Esther. We'll see what we can do, but I'm Jewish and she's Jewish. We would die also. And he sent a letter of Esther telling her that she must go to the king. She must tell the king of this problem, and she must plead with the king for the lives of all the Jewish people. Esther wrote a letter back to Mordecai, and she said, well, I don't know. You know, the king is very powerful, and even though he likes me, even though he loves me, he has not called for me for 30 days now. And he has a rule. Nobody can go to the king without being asked to come to the king by the king. Nobody could go to the king unless the king invited that person. You could not just go to the king and show up no matter how important it was, because it would cost you your life. It would cost you your life, and immediately the king's guards would take you and kill you, because nobody could go to the king without being invited by the king. There was only one chance that you had. If the king extended and stretched out his golden staff, his golden scepter to you, the shevet, if he extended his golden staff to you and you touched that, then you would live and you could talk to the king. But that hardly ever happened. And anyone who came to the king without being asked was killed, for the most part. And Esther said to Mordecai, writing him back a letter, she said, well, I don't know. He's not asked for me in 30 days. And if I go to him without being invited by him, I can die. And she wrote that letter back to Mordecai. Now let's stop there and let's talk about that. I think actually the king was pretty smart. Anybody who's ever been in a big position of authority at a big company, everybody tries to get to the boss. Everybody tries to get to the top guy because they think that maybe they will get a better job. Maybe they will come up with a smart idea that he will like, and they will receive more money, more power, a better title, a better name. And so people all throughout the corporate world in business try to do these things. I worked for a very big company. I worked for the former president of the largest division of IBM. He was at another company at the time. He had another plan. He would not kill people that came to him without being invited, because you can't do that in America and stay out of jail. Well, maybe you can with some courts. But anyway, he had another plan. Everybody that came to him without being invited, and they had all of these good ideas, and they would talk to him and talk to him. Well, the poor guy could never have any time to himself. He could never have any time to do his own work because everybody was trying to impress him with their ideas, you see. His plan was different. He said, I know what I'll do. And every time somebody came to him with their idea, he would listen patiently to their idea. And at the end, he would give them some very hard work to do. And so they would leave wondering if that was worth it or not, because he would assign them a very difficult task to do. Well, before long, the word got around to everybody else that don't go and see him. Don't go and see the president, because if you do, he's going to have you do some really hard work. And so his plan worked. Nobody came to him unless he invited them. But this king was a little more, shall we say, to the point, because everybody who came to him without being invited would die at the point of a spear. And so this king loved Esther, but he had not invited her. And Esther had written back to Mordecai, I don't know if I can do this. He may kill me. And Mordecai wrote back a letter to Esther. And we read these verses. In chapter 4, verse 13 again, it says, and Mordecai told them to answer Esther, do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all of the other Jews. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise from the Jews from another place. And you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to this kingdom, the kingdom, for such a time as this. I think that Mordecai was a very wise man. Today in Judaism, he is considered to be one of the wisest Jewish people who have ever lived, one of the wisest sages. Obviously, he goes down in history as the man who saved, through Esther, the Jewish people. It was really God's plan, and we'll see that in a little bit. We'll see how God made all of these different little things happen to make it to where the Jewish people would survive. But notice Mordecai's wisdom. Mordecai said to Esther, if you are silent, God will find another way to save the Jewish people. That's very wise of Mordecai, because he knew that God had promised that the Mashiach, the Messiah, would come from the Jewish people. And the Mashiach had not come yet. So he knew that there was no way to defeat the prophecies and the plans and the will and the counsel of God. So if Esther refused and she was silent before the king, he knew that God would make another plan to save the Jewish people so that his prophecies would be fulfilled. The Bible says that there is no counsel and there is no wisdom against the Lord. It doesn't matter how many people sit together and make a plan. It doesn't matter if all of the kings of the earth gather together, as it says in Psalms 2, Tehillah time. It does not say, there is no hope, in other words, for any human counsel against the Lord. Though they be kings, though they be the rulers of all of the earth, their wisdom is nothing compared to the wisdom and power of the Lord. It is impossible to defeat the Lord. It is impossible to make a plan that will stand against the Lord's wisdom and His word. And so Mordecai knew this, and he says, if you're silent, God will make another way to save the Jews. But you and your father's household will perish. So now think of this. She had hid the fact that she was Jewish. And she thought about this and she said, okay, well, that's true. And if not me, then who? If not now, then when? I must stand for my people. God will take care of me. And so she went in before the king without being invited. And the king saw her. And she had already said in her heart, it says in the scriptures, she says, if I die, then I die. If I must die, then I must die. She had already resigned herself to the fact that she might not leave that room alive. But she went into the king. He looked and he saw her. I'm sure there was a moment of silence as they both wondered what would happen next. But then the king extended his scepter to her. He extended his mercy to her, and he gave her an audience. He then said, okay, I will talk with you, and you don't have to die. So she came, she touched the end of the scepter in an act of appreciation and thanks to the king for not taking her life. And he said, what is it? And basically she said, well, there's something very important I need to talk to you about. But will you come tomorrow and have a banquet with me together with Haman, the second most powerful man in your kingdom, the prime minister? Will you come and have a meal at a banquet with me and Haman together? And the king said, okay. He did not ask why, because it was a custom of the Persians at that time to make your plan known gradually, so that you can build up an understanding in the mind of the king before you reveal all of the details. So that day came, and they had a banquet. Haman was invited, Esther was invited, and the king was invited. The three of them were there having the meal together, and the king said, okay, Esther, tell me what it is that you want. So I love you so much, anything that you want, even up to half of my entire worldwide kingdom. Up to half of my kingdom, and I will give it to you. Just tell me what you want. Haman had been thinking, oh, I'm really important now. Look, I'm so important that the queen had a banquet with just the king and me. I'm the only one invited to sit with the king and the queen. He went home and he told his wife. He told all of his friends. He says, guess what happened today? I was telling you how important I am. Well, I was invited to a meal with the queen and the king. Nobody else. Just me and the queen and the king. So Haman had all of this pride, you see, in his mind. And so he's sitting there at the table. And he wants to know why Queen Esther called this also. And he's listening. He doesn't know she's Jewish, you see. He doesn't know she's related to Mordecai. He hates Mordecai. He knows that Mordecai is Jewish, and he's already put the plan and the decree with the king's signet ring to kill all of the Jewish people on the 13th day of Adar, Shana Haba, in the next year. Okay? And he's sitting there listening to the queen, and she's not telling the king what she wants. And she says, well, if I have found favor in your sight, king, then will you come one more time tomorrow, again to another meal, to another banquet with me, with Haman and with yourself? And she said, then I will tell you what this is all about. Then I will tell you all of my plan and why I'm doing this. And so the king patiently said, okay. And so they leave. Well, Haman, on his way out, passes by Mordecai at the gate, and once again, Mordecai did not bow before Haman, and everybody else was bowing. But Haman kept it in. He wanted to kill Mordecai right then and there, but he was so high with pride now because of the meeting he had with the king and Esther, the queen, that he just passed by and he said, yeah, I'll deal with you later. And so he passed by, he went home, he told all of his friends and his wife again, says, oh, they want me to come again and eat with them at the banquet. Just the king and the queen and me. And he was very proud, and he had these high thoughts of himself in his mind. And he says, as we say in English sometimes, he was a legend in his own mind. You see. He was not a legend in his own time. In fact, his name will be forgotten. His name will be associated with evil forever. But in his own mind, he was a hero. He was very important. He was a legend. But then something happened that night. As the king was laying down and trying to sleep, the next day he would have his second banquet with Esther and with Haman. But that night, for some reason, the Bible says he could not sleep. He couldn't sleep. And so he commanded that his guards would bring to him the book of the chronicles of his reign. All of the things that they had recorded that he had done while he was king, he had them read it to him. Well, as they were reading it to him, they came across the story about how Mordecai heard about the two guards that tried to make a plan to kill the king. And that was back in the past now sometime. But the king was interested in this. He said, Mordecai did this? Who is this man, Mordecai? And they told him. And they said, well, he saved the king's life. Was anything ever done to reward Mordecai for doing this? Did we ever do anything special to thank Mordecai for saving the king's life? And the king's men said, no, nothing has ever been done for him. And then he said, well, what should we do to honor the man who saved the king's life? And they were trying to come up with plans. Well, at that very moment, they looked out and they saw that Haman was still close by. So they had Haman come in because Haman was the number 2 man in all of the kingdom. He was the most trusted man in all of the kingdom. He was the most powerful man in all of the kingdom underneath the king. And the king brought Haman in and he said, Haman, I have a question for you. I want to know, what do you think a king should do when he wants to honor the most wonderful man in all of the kingdom? A very important man in all of the kingdom. What do you think the king should do? Well, Mordecai thinks it's all about him. Right? I'm sorry, Haman, not Mordecai. Haman thinks it's all about him. So Haman says, ho, ho, ho. I better be careful how I answer this. I'll make my little list in my mind about all the things that I want to have done for me. Because who would the king want to honor more than me? There's nobody better than me. There's nobody smarter. There's nobody more wonderful than me. It's all about me. I'll tell him how to honor me. So Haman then began to tell the king, he said, well, this is what I would do if the king wanted to honor someone that important. I would put the king's robes on him. I would give him all of these things. I would give him all of this honor in the kingdom. And I would have him walk throughout the kingdom with the complete honor and authority of the king. With people saying before him, bow down, here comes this man that we are to honor by the king. All of these things. And he made all of these things up, thinking that he was going to be the one that the king wanted to honor. And he came up with this very wonderful list of things. He said, I would put him on a horse and have him go throughout all of your kingdom being honored and praised by all of the people. Well, the king listened very carefully to all of the things that Haman said. And then he said, that's a great idea. Go and do that for Mordecai. Well, all of a sudden, he hears the go and do that, and he's saying, oh yeah. He thinks, oh, this is going to be so good. All of my friends are going to see me up on that horse. Everybody bowing down to me, wearing the king's robes. The king's robes. With all of the authority of the king. And he says, go and do that. And then he says, to Mordecai. And Haman goes, huh? What did I just do? So he left a little confused and he goes, well, this is a guy I want to kill and now I've got to honor him. So he was tasked, he was charged, the king told him to make it happen. So now not only can he not stand Mordecai, but now he has to honor him, and even he has to bow down to Mordecai, you see. Well, that night, after the king did that and met with Haman, then he fell asleep. And the next day, of course, was the day of the second banquet where Esther, the king, Xerxes, and Haman would meet together. And so that time came at the evening. Haman came before the king. Esther was there. The king was there. And they were eating their meal. And as soon as they got there, the king said, "Now, Esther, tell me what this is all about." And I want to read to you what Esther said. I love the way that she put it. It says, "And the king and Haman went to dine with Queen Esther. And on the second day, at the banquet of wine, the king again said to Esther, 'What is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted to you, and what is your request? Up to half of the kingdom it shall be done.' Then Queen Esther answered and said, 'If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. Save my life and save the life of my people. For we have been sold," she says in verse 4, "my people and I, we have been sold to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. Had we been sold as male and female slaves," I love this, "I would have held my tongue, although the enemy could never compensate for the king's losses." In other words, if somebody was just selling us to be slaves, I would not trouble you with such news. But it's the very lives of me and my people that are at stake, and we need your help. And the king, Ahasuerus, as he was also called, that was the name for Xerxes I, answered and said to Queen Esther, "Who is he? And where is he? Who would dare presume in his heart to do such a thing?" And Esther said, "The adversary and the enemy is this wicked Haman." Well, now if you're Haman, you got to put yourself in that room, looking at Haman's face. And Haman is listening. Oh yeah. Well, the king obviously wants me here for my wisdom to help him with what Queen Esther wants. And then she says, Haman is trying to kill me and all my people. And Haman's like, what? Now he doesn't know what to say because there's plenty of witnesses to what he's trying to do. Many people know about it. A date has already been set that they would kill the Jewish people from all of the kingdom, not just the land in Persia, but all of the kingdoms that they have conquered. He sent out a decree to the whole world. Everybody knows about this. But Haman did not count on the fact that Esther was Jewish. He did not count on the fact that Mordecai knew Esther and that she was like a daughter to him. He did not count on that fact because he knew that the king loved Esther so much, you see. So now he's really in trouble. And the king gets so angry, he stands up very quickly. He walks outside to the garden. Well, at that moment, Haman knows that his life is gone. He knows that he only has one chance, and that's to get down on his knees and beg Esther to spare his life, because she is the accuser. And unless she takes her accusation away, he's going to die. And so he's so confused that he comes to Esther and she's sitting down reclining on this sofa, on this chair, this long area here, the sofa. And he's like pleading with her, and it looks like he's fallen down on her. And the king at that very moment walks back in and he sees Haman doing this, and he goes, "Will you even assault my queen in the very palace where I live?" And the guards take Haman, they take him, they cover his head over, which is the signal that they are about to execute him. his time is now up. And the guards tell the king, they said, Haman has already prepared a big spear, a big pole, and it is 25 meter, is 25 meters, 75 feet high and sharpened. And he has already prepared it to stab Mordecai with this and impale his body on this pole. And then the king says, well, use it for Haman instead. Now, I don't know if you've ever had shish kebabs. But imagine a shish kebab with the stick about 4 times thicker, and you're still putting that little piece of meat on it. And Haman is probably not very happy at this point. He's probably no longer very impressed with himself. And they take him out and they kill him like that. But there's still a problem. The threat to the Jewish people has been identified. It's no longer a secret. It's no longer a secret, and everybody knows about it, but there's nothing they can do about it. I'll tell you why. There was a rule that every king of the Medo-Persian Empire had to obey. Once he made a decree and sealed it with the signet ring of the king, even the king could not change that decree. You might remember in the book of Daniel, Hanavi, Daniel the prophet, when these people complained about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And they said, King, make a decree that anyone that worships any god except for you will be put to death in the furnace. And the king did it, sealed it with his signet. And then later, when he found it was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, he tried to deliver them and he tried to save them. But they came back to the king and says, remember, king, any king of the Medo-Persian Empire that makes a decree and seals it with his ring can never, ever change it. It must happen even if the king wants to change it. It cannot be changed. So this was yet another Persian king, Xerxes, Ahasuerus. And he is now saying that this can't be changed. So this day has already been set where the Jewish people will be delivered. And so he says, well, I don't know what to do. But he started thinking, what can I do to save my queen? What can I do to save Mordecai? Because now he knows how Mordecai received this information. How Esther received the information from Mordecai, her uncle. And so the king starts thinking about plans, and Esther said, well, let me work on it some. I'll think of a way that somehow it could be okay. So she sent messages back to Mordecai, and Mordecai and her came up with a plan, and the plan was, okay, we cannot change the previous decree, but at least we can make the Jewish people prepared so that they can fight for their lives and they can prevail and they will not lose their lives. And so they made a decree that said throughout all of the empire, throughout all of the Medo-Persian world, we decree that every Jew can fight for his life on this day, and they can take the life of anybody that would try to steal their possessions or take their lives. They can defend themselves, and when they make an army to defend themselves, and when they have the weapons to defend themselves, they are authorized by the king to defend themselves. And not only that, but they will also receive all of the possessions of anyone who hates them that they kill. And they gave them plenty of time to organize these huge armies and gave them permission to slaughter and to kill anyone who hated them and who was going to try to kill them. And so you know the end of the story. That day came and everybody was afraid of the Jewish people. And all of the people that tried and hated the Jewish people were themselves killed that day. And their lives were taken, and all of the spoils were given to the Jewish people by order of the king. So even though he could not bring back the decree that Haman had made with the ring of the king, he made another decree that made it to where the Jewish people would win. But today I'd like to talk to you about you. I'd like to talk to you about the times that we live in closing. Now, you know, Haman was the very face of evil. We have people like that today. There are people in this world that could very easily be Haman's seed. There are people that just talk about destroying the Jewish people and erasing their memory as a people, as a nation. There are people that do that today. They won't succeed. God was trying to make the prophecies of the coming of the Mashiach to where they could never be defeated. So Mordecai understood this, and he said, even if you, Esther, even if you remain silent, God will make another way, because God's plans can never be defeated. He knew that any plan of God to bring the Mashiach, God would defend, and there would be no counsel, there would be no wisdom, there would be no power that could stand before the plans and purposes of God. It's satanic. It's spiritual. There's a spiritual battle going on behind the scenes to try to prevent the Mashiach from coming. But the Mashiach we believe in has already come once. And the Scriptures also prophesy in the Tanakh and in Habrit HaChadashah, the New Testament and the Old, that He will come again. The first time He came as Mashiach ben Yosef, the suffering servant, to give His life as an atonement for the sins of mankind, so that you and I can have real peace b'toch halev shalanu, in our hearts. But now there's other people trying to destroy Israel and the Jewish people, and their plans will not succeed either, because God has prophesied that the Mashiach will come again as Mashiach ben David, the ruling, reigning, powerful King of the earth, that will take away all sin from this creation and will rule and reign in righteousness. And He will establish righteousness, and He will wipe away every tear, and He will hold our hands, and He will take us to Himself and protect us from anyone who would destroy us. And He will come again, and nothing can stand against those plans of God either. Even though there are other Hamans that live today, they will not succeed. Because God will always make a way for His Word to happen exactly as He said it would, you see. Haman was the very face of evil. There's a lot of evil in the world. I think since Purim is such a happy holiday, I want to leave you with something happy too. We had the cookies where we remember the deliverance of God for the Jewish people from Haman. Esther was not silent. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But there are other people who do evil, and they are evil. They're the very children of Satan. But then there's other people that just make mistakes. And they're not the same. God knows that we're human. He knows that we're made from the Adamah, from dirt. He knows that we're going to fail from time to time. And sometimes we fall down and we do not do the things that we should do. I heard the story the other day about a lady who could not pay her bills. She was going to be taken out of her apartment because she had no money to pay for the rent. She didn't know what to do. So she decided she would have to be a little bad. But she didn't want to hurt anybody. So she came up with a plan. And her plan was she was going to go down to the big park in the middle of the city, and she was going to hide behind these bushes, and she was going to kidnap a child. And then she would demand the ransom money for this child, and then once she had the money, she could let the child go back, and then she could pay her rent, and everything would be okay. So she went down to the park, she hid behind this tree, And there was this little 5-year-old boy named Tommy. And he came walking along, and she jumped out from the tree, and she took Tommy behind the tree. And she said, "Listen, I'm sorry to have to do this, but I'm going to write a note." And the note said, "I'm sorry to have to do this. I'm desperate. I have kidnapped your little boy. Leave $10,000 at the bottom of the big oak tree in the middle of the park tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock. She took the note, she pinned it on the inside of the little boy's jacket. And she told the little boy, she says, "Now you go straight home and show that to your mother." And she signed the note. She didn't want to sign her name because she didn't want anyone to know who she was. So she thought, well, my hair is blonde, I'll write signed the blonde. And she sent the boy straight home. Well, he went home. The next morning at 7 o'clock, she came to the tree, the big oak tree in the middle of the park. And sure enough, there was a sack with the money in it at the bottom of the tree. There was a sack with $10,000 in it at the bottom of the tree, but there was also a little note in it. And the mother had said, "Here's your money." And then she also said, "I can't believe that you would do this to another blonde." You see, but Haman was the very face of evil. He wasn't just some good person who had to do some wrong or something. But I want to ask you today, you know, many people here know the Lord. Many people here have salvation in Yeshua HaMashiach. You are like Esther. You have the power to save the Jewish people from death and annihilation. Did you know that? I'm not talking about physical death. I'm talking about eternal separation from God. The secret that you have in you, if you keep silent, many people will not be in heaven. Because Satan is waging a battle against the Jewish people so that they do not know the truth. And he wants to destroy them. And if he cannot destroy them physically, he will destroy them spiritually. But you have the truth. And you cannot remain silent. If you do, God will raise up someone else instead of you. But it said in the book of Esther, chapter 4, as Mordecai told Esther, "Who knows but what you were brought to this very place, to this very land, to this very city, to live in the neighborhood where you live, to shop at the stores where you shop, to work at the places where you work. Who knows but what you were not brought there for this very reason?" You cannot be silent. Today, we celebrate God's victory that He gave us. Amen. One day, before the throne of God, there will be others celebrating that victory that God gives them today because you were not silent, but you told them about the way, the truth, and the life, and how to gain entry into the kingdom of heaven. Amen.